Going on, everyone? John Matrix here. Hope you're all having yourselves a wonderful day wherever you're at. Whenever you're watching this, we're going to be continuing on with this red tape series here today. We're going to be checking out another SCP-001 proposal in this red tape series. There seems to be quite a lot of them. We're jumping into Mamjul Korar. I think that's how it's pronounced. By the Exploring series. Some links will be down below for this continued red tape series playlist and to the Exploring series channel. Please do me a favor. If you enjoy this video as we go through it, be sure to go over there and give it a like, as well as, you know, give the Exploring series some support, show him some love, hit that sub button on his channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to join us when I'm doing these reactions live as I am right now with my YouTube members, there's a join button underneath the video, as well as a link in the description to the YouTube membership benefits that I have to offer. So, been around the channel for a while, want to take your support to the next level. That's something you can check out. And if you enjoy this video of mine, my reactions, my commentary, etc., do consider leaving a like and a sub, as it helps me and the channel grow, and it lets me and YouTube algorithm know that you guys enjoy these kind of videos and content and you want to see some more. So thank you guys, appreciate you as always, and let's jump right into it. Again, this is SCP-001 Mamjul Korar Part 1. Set up, volume up, boop.
SCP-001 Mamjul Korar Part 1.
Part Uno.
It's a fairly common theme among the SCP universe that some things are just better off buried and forgotten.
Very true.
This holds true for much of horror fiction, of course, but the SCP universe has a particular way of reawakening things with far greater consequences than merely a group of wayward teenagers being killed off. The previous SCP-001 in this series, Ammani Ram, certainly demonstrated that clearly enough, bringing the ancient Mechanite Empire into the modern day and causing quite a stir in the Foundation.
Indeed.
It revealed greater detail about the ancient wars between the Mechanites, the Davites, and the Sarkites, but so far the Foundation has far more questions than answers.
As do
and
I.
After what happened in Ammani Ram, they're not exactly thrilled to find out more. Let's take a look. Let's first begin with a little primer on what exactly happened in Ammani Ram. I would, of course, recommend either reading that article yourself or...
Researchers from SCP went there, found the preserver who was left over. They powered up the city. The preserver was actually, you know, one of the generals of the Mechanites, blah, blah, blah. The researcher turns into a, you know, Mechanite person by downloading memories into them, and now the culture is revived. Essentially, in a nutshell.
Or viewing my previous video on it, but I'll cover the broad details. The Foundation discovered a hidden ancient city in the southern Arabian desert, determining it to be Ammani Ram, the fortress city.
Lord Blackwood found it. Okay, let's give credit where credit is due.
Of the Mechanite Empire. 2 researchers were chosen to head up the investigation, Dr. Robert Aram and Dr. Hedvig Nussbaum. The technology still present in the city proved to be incredible, notably a mechanical throne that allows an individual to experience vivid memories from the past rulers of the city, all named Bumaro. Over time, Aram became increasingly disconnected from the Foundation, diving deeper and deeper into the memories of the past until he eventually takes on the mantle of Bumaro himself.
Right. They essentially find a golden throne, and the golden throne, very 40k-ish, is able to, basically like the Matrix, you're able to kind of like jack into the memories of the past and download them into your brain. And so he essentially ends up like taking on the consciousness of the line of Bumaros, who was basically like the emperor line for the Mechans.
He declares Ammani Ram to be his, and states that the Church of the Broken God will change the world in order to be protected from the Abominate, a mysterious fourth entity or group from ancient times.
That is one of my biggest questions from that previous video. Exactly what is the Abominate? Is it Is it in fact the fourth faction, something else completely that is new that they're building up? Is it 610? You know, did something else happen with it? It seems like from one of the lines they had stated, the Abominant was an individual. They had enough power to tear down a section of the walls of Ammani Ram. So I don't know.
Times that still seems to be around in the modern day. The rest of Aram's team, including Nussbaum, also betrayed the Foundation, although not necessarily of their own
I'm
free
always
will.
prepared. Okay.
Before we get into the SCP proper, we're given a few verses from a historical account, which is noted to have been introduced into this file at a later date, under Containment Protocol Herodotus, named after the Greek historian said to be the father of history.
Yes.
The verses read, as witnessed by Var Silmitabaya, first Rajmata of the Scarlet Maharaja. In the first age, when the great gods clashed in the sky and split the heavens in their four-prong war, the material...
Interesting that now it's 4. So is the Abominant obviously then another one of these, you know, gods? Because in the previous video from the Meccans, their creation mythos is that there were 3 gods. They fought with each other. None were stronger than the other. Each of them became wounded and fell to the earth, you know, and then Meccan, you know, happened to have fallen where she fell and was found by, you know, like a family of sheep herders and then lifted them up, etc. Interesting.
Plane bore witness to the first, the greatest war of the cosmos. Their dance was one of fury and hatred and destruction, and in the place of stars they twirled and shook and gyrated, bringing down the wrath to the song of creation itself.
I wonder if the Abominant's a Sem. That could be interesting, right? If that's just what they call it. If a Sem would be in this, right? You know, like I get that this is completely different canon than what is the Cactus verse, but that's where my brain kind of goes, right? What other being do I know of, I guess, that could be that powerful if it's an individual? But supposedly, you know, in the Cactus verse, the Sem is more powerful than any of these other gods mentioned. So who knows?
The metal, the flesh, the scarlet, and the wretch wrestled in the maw of eternity
Metal, the flesh,
and
the
moved
scarlet, and
like
the wretch.
streams with the force of floods and broke. And when it was over, when the divine fluid had been spilt onto the wet soil, the quarter came crashing down to the material plane, broken and torn, landing in the far corners and crevices of the one land, there to lay for ages and ages past before an eye was lain upon them. The Scarlet lay, and in the millennia life sprung up in the material plane, from lichen to fish to trees, and then finally man arose in the far east, south, and west on the backs of their new gods. But the Scarlet had already created life, unbeknownst to its brother and sisters. As the gods slumbered in their ersatz tombs, the Scarlet reached out with the gift of life, striking a seed on the astral plane that sprouted, growing wildly and with abandon, unobserved and unlimited, existing only in the gaps and roots and vines of the jungle. Uncountable cycles before man took his first steps on Asia, the spirits, the Deva, expanded from a single thought of a dreaming god to a people, a culture, and a civilization on the unobserved astral plane, as they danced and hunted and killed and warred and mated around the great tree of life in worship to the Scarlet.
That's interesting, right? So I don't know if, again, in this canon, right, like in other canons, the kind of idea with the Scarlet King is, right, that he's basically in two halves. There's like the spiritual body, and then there's the physical body, and both of them have kind of been locked away. Should they ever like recombine, he will be all powerful again and be able to go out and start consuming universes, right? So I wonder if the injury that happened to the Scarlet King was that he was separated. Maybe his physical body was destroyed, but spiritual body wasn't. And so the life that he created were these spiritual creatures, the Davites. It's interesting that the Davites in this canon are that. They are, astral, spiritual body creatures and not of the physical realm, I guess.
And the god, the Scarlet, pinned underneath the ever-growing weight of the jungle as the men moved in and built their huts and their farms and killed and died, yet more victims of the brutal circle of life, reached up and dug its fingers in, plucking its eye from its socket and pushing it up, just as the first man sought refuge under a tree. The gem, swaddled in the same roots, sprung from the mouth of the beast, sung out for a champion, for a warrior who would raise his sword in the name of the first, truest magic, and march forth under the banner of the first, truest of the four gods, to strike a bargain with the Deva, children of the Scarlet House, and become their Chakravarti. Whereas the Ammani Ram proposal took a close look at the Mechanite Empire, this time we'll be looking more closely at the Davites, with these verses explaining that they first arose in the astral plane, created by an ancient entity known as the Scarlet, after a great cosmic war. As mankind...
See, now I want to know about the cosmic war, you know what I'm saying? Like, now I want to know more about the war with the gods, All this stuff piques my curiosity. It's the same thing with Warhammer, right? Like, I want to know more about the war in heaven. All that stuff going on with the Necrons and the Catan and the old ones and creation of the elves and the orcs and all that, The more stuff that gets brought up, the more I want to know.
Began to spread across the earth on top of the tombs of the ancient gods.
Exactly.
The Scarlet plucked one of its eyes out and offered it to a human champion, who would strike a bargain with the Deva and become their Chakravarti, their Emperor of Emperors. With that, we move on to the actual SCP itself, the ruins of Mamjul, an ancient pre-First Occult War city-state located approximately 734 kilometers off the southern tip of the Indian subcontinent. Evidence seems to suggest that Mamjul was constructed and located at or above sea level, so how it came to rest 3.6 kilometers underwater is unknown.
It's interesting, right? Like, I'd always wondered if, not saying that this is going to get into it and that this is maybe a reference to Atlantis, but I'd always wondered if there was ever going to be kind of like any kind of SCP Atlantis stories, any kind of like ancient civilization stuff like this around Atlantis, because I feel like Atlantis would kind of be like another kind of perfect ancient historical, advanced faction that someone could get into and create a mythos around, I feel like it would fit well in some of the, like the Cactus verse and maybe some of this. So I don't know. I'm curious if this is going to kind of get into that, being that this is underwater. Maybe it was not underwater previously and is now because of, some kind of war or battle that happened, etc. But certainly vibe around with sunken cities, right?
It was first discovered by the Foundation on August 24th, 2002, and originally believed to be a mundane archaeological ruin. Its location was recorded to disseminate to the global archaeological community in the near future, but closer inspection revealed the city's remarkable preservation, despite having spent well over 3 millennia underwater. Further investigation by divers unearthed the full extent of the city, which was initially thought to be the ruins of a small Bronze Age settlement, but was revealed to contain several hundred buildings, most of them buried under large amounts of silt and sand. In addition, divers found considerable evidence that Mamjul was the seat of a Bronze Age advanced human civilization that made extensive use of thaumaturgy and biomancy, known to the Foundation as the Davic Covenant. Additional personnel were then dispatched to confirm that this was the Davic city of Mamjul, as mentioned in the Aegean tablets, and corroborated by noted explorer and naturalist Lord Blackwood, as well as evidence from Ammani Ram. We're next provided a historical briefing on Mamjul, including relevant passages from the Aegean tablets, which were located previously by the Foundation thanks to Lord Blackwood. Mamjul has some historical analog in mundane history and culture, although not to the same extent as Ammani Ram did. The most explicit example is that of Kumari Kandam, also known as Lemuria. Lemuria was a hypothetical sunken continent first proposed in the 19th century as an explanation for the presence of lemur fossils in both Madagascar and India, but not in any land masses separating the two. This theory predated that of continental drift and plate tectonics theory. Lemuria was quickly co-opted, however, by a large movement of Tamil revivalists in India as a potential birthplace of human civilization, altering the idea to fit with cultural legends of an ancient Bronze Age Tamil civilization, one that would eventually form the basis for Indian civilization before being suddenly and violently swallowed by the sea. Of course, the Lemuria hypothesis was eventually rendered obsolete by plate tectonics theory, and no mundane records exist to support its existence. In the occult community, however, Kumari Kandam had been the subject of considerable debate, long after the Lemuria hypothesis was discarded by mundane science. Several expeditions, funded by various anomalous organizations, ventured into the Indian Ocean throughout the 20th century in an attempt to find evidence of the sunken continent, with only one having any results. An explorer known by the alias of Captain Nemo claims to have discovered Atlantean ruins in the region during a 1925 self-funded expedition, but his records were never released and disappeared along with him in 1939.
Yikes.
As for the
conspiracy much?
Aegean tablets, they contained the first discovered mentions of Bronze Age advanced human civilizations, and were originally recovered from the Sea of Crete by agents of the French government prior to the Revolution. As mentioned, they were eventually claimed by the Foundation, but there's been great difficulty in translating all of them. The segment of the first tablet that mentions Mamjul reads, Mamjul and Korar, two dark fortresses resting in the jungles of the subcontinent. The magicians and sorcerer Nawabs allied themselves against the horrors of the jungle and crossed a pact with something ancient. The covenant of the Deva was born, using the first magic gifted to man, the magic of life and death. By 1999, the second and fourth tablets have been fully translated, with the fourth describing the Mechanite Empire and Ammani Ram, while the second covers Mamjul, Korar, and the forerunner civilization of the Davic Covenant. It reads, Root, blood, steel. Once, men huddled for warmth and dryness under the broad leaves of the jungle titans. Once, fire was a weak dream, drowned under the weight of endless flood and rain. Once, the land was blanketed so densely with untamed forest that the spirits of the trees themselves walked past the coast and into the sea. Once, man was weak and frail, battered from the constant war to survive with the jungle. Once, a man curled into the base of a tree, sheltering from a torrent, His fingers discovered a scarlet jewel jammed between the knotted roots. It shone into his eyes with depth like an ocean of blood.
It's almost like, I kind of want to go. I think I'm gonna rewind this and just listen to it again. But it's like, I don't know. I don't know how I want to say it. But essentially, humanity like found these relics that were left over from this divine war that then gave humanity powers that then led them back to the belief in these entities, which then empowered them almost. Again, kind of a situation, you know? I had brought this up in the Burnt Offerings video, I think. It's either that or maybe Ammani Ram, but the idea of like maybe that's how there is kind of like a cycle of life and death and rebirth among the gods where, you know, if they are wounded to the point where God can actually die, they can essentially ensure their rebirth is to leave some kind of relic or evidence behind of them for mortal beings of some sort, humanity, whatever, to find and then utilize as a way of recreating belief in them, and then enough belief eventually resurrects them, whether it's in their old form or a new form, you know? I feel like that is kind of a thing that seems like it's going on here almost, you know what I mean? Yeah, in order to bypass them falling asleep, forgotten mortals, like technique to recreate belief. Yeah, something along those lines. But it would make sense, right? Like if you're a god, as a way to like ensure your resurrection or a means of being reborn, you know, if lower, I guess, quote unquote, lower beings, right? Like if their belief in you is what empowers you, then again, you know, if you're going to die or if you're dying or if a god can even get sick or something like that, right? Like leave relics, artifacts, things that you've empowered with your essence behind for them to find that could then, you know, lead them into belief of you again, and you can be resurrected in some kind of new form. You know, you might not necessarily be resurrected into what you were, but maybe you'll be born again into something new, you know? I don't know. But I'm gonna rewind.
3. Sheltering.
I'm gonna rewind this and kind of listen to it again.
Blood. Steel. Once.
So blood, steel, and root, I think, is also what he said. So I mean, like, steel, Meccan, root would be Davite, blood would be Sarkic. I don't know what the fourth would be, right?
For warmth and dryness under the broad leaves of the jungle
Fire,
titans.
I don't know.
Once, fire was a weak dream, drowned under the weight of endless flood and rain. Once, the land was blanketed so densely with untamed forest that the spirits of the trees themselves walked past the coast and into the sea. Once, man was weak and frail, battered from the constant war to survive with the jungle. Once, a man curled into the base of a tree, sheltering from a torrent. His fingers discovered a scarlet jewel jammed between the knotted roots. It shone into his eyes with depth like an ocean of blood.
So this would be the eye, I would assume. This is kind of the story of, I guess you could say, the Scarlet King, the leader. I guess in this context, the Scarlet is the god, and the Scarlet King, I would assume, is going to be the leader of the Davites, the king of the Davites. He finds this scarlet jewel that empowers him, you know?
He pulled it from its nest and put it to his ear. The endless scarlet sang to him. It offered a deal. Should he lay down his own mind and soul in service to the spirits, they would gift him their boons. He would ascend to the realm of the gods, and in return, they would assure not just his people's survival, but their power. His children, and his children's children, would be sorcerers. The boons of the Deva would be at their fingertips, and he would be a once and future king. The
It'd be hard to
covenant
pass up an offering
was
like
struck.
that, dude.
The Deva themselves descended from the realm of the spirits and the gods.
Like, especially during the time they're talking about where, like, humanity's still in its infancy. We're probably still very much in, like, hunter-gatherer. Who knows if we even have agriculture really yet for survivability. So, like, talking about an individual who, you know, from the sounds of it, they curled up in a tree for shelter. So, and then they found this jewel. So who knows? Maybe they were an outcast from their tribe. Maybe they were all that was left of their people. You know, who knows? But it would be pretty hard, even in modern times, to kind of like pass up a deal like that. You know what I'm saying?
They met the people and bonded with them. Every body contains two spirits and the power to bend the forest to their will. The first magic was used to raise the city in the depths of the jungle. The people toiled for a year and one day, laying the massive stones and bracing the walls with vine and root, crafting the city that would be the seat of an empire. Mamjul was built under the watchful slumber of the Scarlet and its prophet. And once the Davic cities were assured, and the record was writ, the Covenant marched north under the banner of the Scarlet Maharaja. The word Deva originally refers to supernatural entities and spirits, almost all of which are malevolent, within the canon of Zoroastrianism, a monotheistic faith predicated on good ultimately triumphing over evil. Variations on the term Deva appear throughout several different Asian religions and mythologies, suggesting the Deva mentioned in the tablets are a common source. This is supported by the tablets' claims that the Davic covenant spread their culture and beliefs throughout Asia. Following the incident with Ammani Ram, locating both Mamjul and Korar was elevated to global priority level alpha in order to gain a material advantage over the Church of the Broken God. Various documents, murals, and scrolls recovered from Ammani Ram indicated that the cities were located somewhere on the Indian subcontinent, although the loss of almost all personnel and original records from the Ammani Ram initiative made more specific details unobtainable.
I think they said that two of the cities, the Davite ones, were in the Indian subcontinent. The Sarkic one was in the greater Asian continent, and then the Abominate was coming up from Africa. From what I remember them saying in the Ammani Ram. So that's how like spread out everything was. And then Ammani Ram was in the Middle East, you know, near the Arabian Desert.
Initial search efforts concentrated near established archaeological sites and in India's dense tropical forests resulted in no findings. We're then given a
which is kind of interesting, right? Because then that leaves like all of Europe. There's no like real major civilization. And then obviously in this canon, the North and Southern American continents aren't mentioned at all. So that also is kind of interesting. There's no like major, at least according to this canon, like there's no major civilizations at play with this stuff going on in Europe or North and South America.
Transcript from August of 2002, when the Foundation divers first found the ruins of Mamjul.
Maybe, but I'm just thinking also like, you know, the fairies, the fae, if they were to be in this canon, right? Is it a situation where like these factions just wanted to leave them alone? They didn't want to have anything to do with them. It could also just simply be, right, like that these factions are essentially continuing the war that their gods had with each other, right? Like this is essentially kind of a tale of gods warring with each other. We don't know why they were warring with each other at all initially, but they were all wounded. They fell to Earth, and then their influence spread into humanity. Humanity split up into these different factions and started fighting each other because essentially that's what their gods' influence basically made them to do. And so it's like in this canon is the fact that humanity wars with each other, right? The byproduct of these gods' influence. If these gods had never come to Earth, would humanity never know what war is? Would we be, a kind of more of a unified species? I guess I don't know. Uh, it's just interesting to think of, right? Like, had war and all of those kind of things, those like I guess darker influences, could they have come to us from the gods and spilled over from their war? And we're just continuing their war from their influence, kind of a situation. But yeah, I'm just also wondering, right, like the North and South America stuff, at least in the Cactus verse, that's where like the Fae and the Children of the Night are. So I'm just wondering, right, like, is it just a situation where those people are still ruling over that? Do they even exist? And do these factions even necessarily really care about them in one way or another? Or is it like, are the Fae at this point, like, still, because the Earth is still young, far more powerful, so they don't want to mess with them? Or are they just a nothing thing? Like, do they not even exist? You know what I'm saying?
The two divers, Con 1 and Con 2 of MTF Gamma 6, Deep Feeders, were being guided by senior researcher Pandora Galanis of the Foundation's Parahistory Division. They're located in the Laccadive Sea, about 300 kilometers off the coast of Sri Lanka.
I mean, maybe. I guess maybe this could be something like, I guess if like the Cactus verse ancient lore timeline happened, this could be after the great flood that Methuselah brought about and changed the world. And then, because Sem was imprisoned after that, these gods fought with each other for power, and then their battle just kind of fell to earth, and this is kind of what happened after.
And they're investigating some underwater structures that a satellite array has picked up, although they don't expect to find anything other than piles of trash or weird rocks. The divers are equipped with coyote suits, allowing them to descend down to 5,000 meters with a self-sustaining oxygen supply. The two begin their descent, which will take them about half an hour, and they joke about what kind of weird rock they're going to find this time, while commenting about how they could be on worse dead-end assignments than this. Galanis tries to argue that this isn't a dead-end assignment, as it's global priority level alpha, but Con 1 remarks that it's been 20 years since all that crap in Saudi Arabia, and finding a way to kill SCP-682 is also a global priority level alpha, even though there hasn't been any progress on that.
Yeah.
Galanis says that they may not stumble onto the key to the world here, but they never know what might point them in the right direction.
It's interesting that they mentioned 682 here, right? Like, because obviously 682 is one of the Scarlet King's children. I guess you could say 682 is kind of like the most famous of like the Scarlet King's children out of all of the SCP, proposal things about him. So it's interesting that he exists here, right? But like you said, there's no real mention of the Scarlet King. There's just the Scarlet.
The Foundation wouldn't have ever even gotten involved without the Aegean tablets, and those got pulled out of a shipwreck in Greece. As they finish their descent, they activate their floodlights, seeing a massive, angled stone structure nearby. They begin to swim around the massive structure, which is a tapering cylinder with staggered, massive stone slopes, culminating in a flat central plane. It almost appears to be a pillar, but they can't tell how tall it is as they can't see the seabed, and it looks like there's a lot more buildings below them. Khan 2 activates a sonar topological mapper to give them a better idea of what they're looking at, with Galanis remarking that the structures remind them a little of Orkney architecture, so it's possible that they've stumbled onto some kind of colony. Khan 2 approaches the structure to brush aside a curtain of kelp and seaweed that's built up, discovering a large mural carved into it. It depicts figures dancing, fighting, eating, and copulating under a massive tree within a jungle. The scene continues well past.
That sounds very Children of the Night-ish. You know? That whole story about, prison of Titania and her heart with the Children of the Night and them dancing and singing and mutilating the Fae.
Past the visible sides,
So I'm sure this
and it
is more
appears that
Davik.
most of the structure's surface is covered in intricately carved murals. There's also a series of large glyphs, which they take some photographs of for Galanis to run against the Foundation's database. Galanis pauses as they do so, remarking that the glyphs seem familiar for some reason, which Khan 2 takes as a good sign, in that this is probably just another one of the ancient cultures that they've seen before. Khan 2 then reaches out and grabs a jagged outcropping, bracing her feet against the wall and pulling on it. It eventually cracks and gives way, and she holds up the broken piece, the exterior of which is a different color from the interior. It turns out that the structure is made of wood, which must be petrified and turned to stone. They don't see any planks or nails across the structure though, meaning that it's just one massive piece of wood. Galanis then remarks that the shape makes sense now, as it's not a tower, but a stump. The tree would have had to have been at least a kilometer tall, or probably more, so it's definitely anomalous. They continue to look over it, finding some gaps, but they look more like decorative arches than any entrance. The preliminary reading from their sonar device shows that the whole stump is hollow and very big, so they keep looking. On top of the stump, they find that the edge of it is raised slightly into a form of wall, and there are various sets of steps and short walls across the surface, all seeming to be naturally emerging from the wood. There's no seams or cracks anywhere, but Khan 2 finds a large, flat, circular covering in the center of the surface, with a small gap. They move to lift it, and to their surprise, it's much lighter than its appearance.
Yeah, this whole part of the story here very much has that whole Titania vibes to it.
Would suggest. Khan 2 says that the piece she broke off from the side was heavier than this covering is. The interior is dark, but definitely hollow, so Khan 1 floats down, confirming that this is in fact a building. He can see walls, a big spiral staircase looping up, probably to the roof, although the top of it is cracked off and it's lying on the floor now. Meanwhile, the scan of the glyphs on the side has finally completed, and a match has been found. Galanis checks it, and then tells both of the divers to hold their positions. A minute later, Galanis then tells them to start ascending back to the surface. As he ascends out of the stump, Khan 1 suddenly spasms and swears, saying that it sounded like someone was whispering. Galanis tells them to get out of there now, so they begin rapidly ascending,
Yikes.
without Galanis elaborating on what the glyphs said. A short while later, they reach the surface and climb aboard the ship, although the deck is empty. They remove their suits and head up to the command deck, where they find several researchers huddled around a monitor, along with Galanis. Galanis explains that the computer didn't just find a glyph match, it found an exact visual match. A single scan from 23 years ago, from one of the murals in Ammani Ram. It had the same exact string of glyphs on it, determined to be a sample of the Davite language. It reads, Mamjul Ishivata, House of the Scarlet, seat of the Deva. They found it. Following this, a findings report was urgently transmitted to Site 07, and the ship was ordered to hold position and to let no personnel leave. A special session of the O5 Council was called, consisting of 8 of the members communicating remotely with Galanis. O51 introduces himself as Django Bridge, and mentions that a few of the
My mind obviously immediately, as soon as he says Django, I'm like, Django Fett. Let's get, I mean, that's just what happens. That's the name. When there's Django, then the last name's Fett.
The council members were not able to make it on such short notice, even with the lay space communicators they use. Galanis says that some of them should have received preliminary word on what they found, but 052 remarks that he gets about 400 briefing packets every morning, so they'll need an explanation.
Bro, are those Oscars right there? Or is it's just like, are we in some kind of Hollywood studio here? Or is like the O5 Council actually meeting in Hollywood? Does the O5 Council run Hollywood? Is that what this is telling us right here? I've uncracked it. We've discovered the truth. We've discovered the truth.
Galanis says that they found Mamjul and Korar, causing the council to burst into chatter until 051 orders them to stop and let Galanis explain.
No.
Galanis thanks him.
They're just going to make me part of the O5 Council now because I have cracked the code. I understand, I am, I've proven myself worthy. So now all the secrets will be revealed to me. Everything that's been redacted will no longer be redacted. Okay? That is my reward.
And says that 2 days ago, the Foundation research ship Lilyhammer was conducting routine diving operations on potential sites of interest in the Laccadive Sea, investigating a site with a potential anomaly detected by the Atreus satellite array. 2 divers were sent down and encountered the ruins of a large city centered around an immense calcified tree stump carved out into what they think is some sort of citadel. Galanis pulled them out as soon as a match on the glyphs was found, but the divers did see structures far below them, with the rest of the city being at least the size of Ammani Ram, possibly larger. After a brief pause, the council begins discussing this, stating that
So, I mean, when we at the end of Ammani Ram's kind of tale, right? There was the great battle that was going on, and they essentially base traded, right? Is what was happening, right? The Nulkins / Sarkics and the Davites had made an alliance with each other against the Mechanites. And then the Abominate was also coming up from Africa for whatever reason as another individual group, person, whatever, to remove the Mechans. And so what was happening is the Mechans had committed their forces to taking out this city, and they were unaware that the Alliance had focused on doing the same to them. So I would assume this city is underwater as a result of that battle. The Meccan forces must have, sunk the city, or perhaps in an attempt to save the city, the Davites themselves cast a spell to bring it underwater to, I guess, try to preserve it so it wouldn't be destroyed, because being there, astral beings, maybe they could survive, in a certain kind of state underwater, right? Maybe that's the case, but I would assume that essentially, though, this city is underwater as a result of that battle.
That it's extremely troubling and could be worse than Ammani Ram. 0510 suggests getting rid of it with an underwater tactical nuke, to which the others vehemently disagree, with 057 saying that they've just been served an advantage on a silver platter. The playing field in 1987 was not the same as it is now, and they now have a material incentive to intervening. They are at a disadvantage against Bumaro, waiting for him to strike, The Deva dealt a lethal blow to Ammani Ram, so it is worth at the very least investigating their methods.
Here goes the Foundation playing with stuff they don't understand.
05.
I mean, like, I get where he's coming from, right? The idea of, like, okay, Bamaro is a potential threat. Bamaro and the Church of the Broken God, the last interaction they had with the Foundation was essentially a battle. They left off of, you know, hostile terms. He's got control of those giant colossi that could be a massive threat to Foundation and humanity if he decides to start a war, etc. So they are trying to find potentially some way to equal the playing field or even the playing field and or another kind of deterrent. But Foundation, being the Foundation, will start playing with things that they don't understand, and they're gonna resurrect the Scarlet King or something, dude. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's what's gonna happen. And they're gonna end up bringing back the whole Meccan Davite Sarkic war in modern times, you know, through their actions.
510 says that they haven't heard anything from the Mechanites in a decade, so perhaps they wiped themselves out. While 052 says that they should wait for the administrator, although none of them even know if he's alive. Interrupting, Galanis calls for attention and says that the maps in Ammani Ram pointed them to India, but no one expected it to be in the sea. Project Triad's efforts have been focused into mainland India, and Galanis can't speak as to what happened in 1987, but this isn't the same organization as it was then. They don't allow cybernetics anymore, and they've changed to avoid those mistakes.
I can understand why.
Ultimately, though,
kind of reminds me of Battlestar Galactica with, you know, the whole stuff with the Cylons. They can't have networked computers and stuff like that because they just get hacked. So I could see that also being the same thing here with Meccans. They have to kind of limit the kind of technology that's available to them or shield them in certain ways so that they can't be taken over.
They're not the only ones who know about it, as they've been working off what they managed to get out of Ammani Ram before everything happened, while Bumaro has had access to the city for a decade since. Imagine what he's unlocked since then, and what he...
Yeah, and you're talking about a city that has cold fusion technology, right? Which is something that we still don't even really understand. So, you know, combine that with his knowledge of what modern day people understand, you know, with weaponry and other kinds of technology. If you were to combine that with what is there with the mechanite technology, who knows what they'd be able to, you know, do.
He could do if he takes Mamjul and Korar. As far as they know, the Davic Covenant are half the reason the Mechanites fell, so they need their deterrent.
Yeah.
0510 says that it's not a bad argument, but they're going to need more concrete assurances than happy feelings and declarations of trust. 051 says that they'll continue this discussion in private, and thanks Galanis, telling them to hold their position and maintain the lockdown. 2 days later, an 05 edict was released, accounting for the creation of the Mamjul/Korar initiative, albeit with several restrictions and assurances to prevent unforeseen incidents. Detachments from MTF Alpha 1 and Delta 1 are to be attached to the initiative to monitor progress and report directly to the Council on any developments. Project lead Pandora Galanis is to be routinely tested by operators for memetic or cognitohazardous influence. All personnel are to have cognitohazard resistance values of at least 14.9, and active anomalous objects are only to receive cursory examination on site, with extended research conducted elsewhere.
You know, I'd hate to be the D classes, you know, like, when you think about how the Foundation created this cognitohazard scale to measure how strong cognitohazards were and the resistances people have to them, right? Like, how many D classes did they go through to, like, develop the scale properly? You know what I'm saying? I'd have hated to have been a D class during that period.
Finally, FMS Phantom has been diverted from its assignment in the Southern Ocean and is en route to provide support supply, and personnel to the FRS Lilyhammer. Galanis has been informed of and agreed to these restrictions, and O5 Command will take a significant position in administrative decisions for the initiative. Due to heading up the discovery of Mamjul, as well as their prior experience with anomalous civilizations, Galanis was selected as the project lead, with the recommendation of O51. We're given a quick dossier on Galanis, age 44, who was recruited by the Foundation straight out of university with a PhD in anthropology. They were assigned to the Ammani Ram initiative at its beginning in 1983, but transferred out of the location after only 3 months due to health reasons. They continued on the project, however, handling and analyzing recovered mechanite technology and artifacts. They were eventually reassigned to a series of low-priority para-history research projects, and was denied promotion 6 different times due to internal security directive Candy Shop, which limited the handful of personnel that had been working outside of Ammani Ram in case of lasting cognitohazardous influence.
Mark.
We're also given a quick brief on the FMS Phantom, indicating that it's crewed by 470 humans and a significant complement of AIs. It was originally purchased from the Republic of China in 1992, but was extensively retrofitted by the Foundation as a prototype for Olympia systems, and is equipped with a signal warfare suite, traditional arms and ammo, multiple laboratories, and aircraft. The Phantom arrived at the Lilyhammer's location on September 2nd, and created a long-term connection between the two ships. Galanis meets with Captain Hickman of the Phantom, along with AJ Desai, the lead diver on the Lilyhammer. Hickman remarks on how sudden this all feels, as he's used to having orders months in advance, but says that this is far more exciting than his prior position in Antarctica. Galanis agrees, mentioning how 2 weeks ago they were assuring the rest of the team that they'd find something eventually, and now they're sitting in on council meetings and leading this massive project. Another man then enters, and Hickman introduces him as Lieutenant Lucian Greaves, head of the security detail for the project, a member of MTF Alpha 1. Desai immediately refers to them as their babysitters, to which Greaves says that he understands that Foundation naval teams are used to a certain level of independence this far from civilization. They all know, however, that this project wouldn't have been approved without certain assurances, such as the presence of Alpha 1. Ammani Ram is still a fresh wound, and he's been tasked with making sure it isn't reopened. He hopes to make this as painless as possible for everyone though, and they'll try not to disturb the research work beyond what's needed.
It's interesting, right? Like, I get that they're still kind of sore about the whole Ammani Ram thing, and I can understand that they have to, like, view it and Bamari as, like, a certain kind of threat, right? Because they just don't know what he's going to do, right, with that kind of technology. And if they advance it even further, you know, the Foundation needs to have some kind of way of being prepared to combat them if necessary. But, like, it almost feels like they're taking too much of an antagonistic approach to the situation with them, right? Like, again, the way it ended, there feels like there still could be possibility of diplomacy, even though they had, like, ended with a fight. You know, it still feels like there could be a possibility of some kind of diplomacy between the Church of the Broken God, the Foundation. So I don't know if it's a situation where maybe they have attempted that or they haven't. They haven't really mentioned that in this video here, but it just seems like the Foundation's view is a little too antagonistic. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Because I feel like it would probably, being that he was once a Foundation member, right? There's still a part of him left in there. it would be a better situation to have positive, like, diplomatic relations with a faction like that, where you might have some kind of way of being like, okay, obviously we need to keep your city and the stuff that you guys do, a secret from the rest of the world because it's anomalous, blah, blah, blah. We'll help you do that. And we can, still help, protect you guys. And in return, we can learn some of the technologies, you know what I'm saying? Like, it feels like there still was at least a chance for positive benefit between the two of them, and maybe there still will be, but I don't know, it just seems like they're taking a little bit more too much of it, like an antagonistic approach, and it almost feels kind of like a Cold War situation where they're in like an arms race, and the other side, they know has a leg up, so they're looking for that, like, mutually assured destruction deterrent, so they can say, hey, if you guys don't do what we want to do, we have this, leg up and can release this and blah, blah, blah. I don't know. Anyway.
Galanis thanks him for that, but he continues, mentioning that he's going to need their cooperation for that, and hopes they don't have any qualms with them checking in on the work every so often. Galanis understands, and Greaves leaves, with Desai immediately complaining about Alpha One's presence.
Yeah.
He's in an MTF as well, but he says that agents like him are normal people for the most part, while those guys are ex-military and CIA types, the type that shoot first and waterboard later.
True.
He doesn't trust them, and Hickman says that there's probably not a man in the Foundation who wouldn't be at least a little jittery when the red right hand is looking over their shoulder. Desai asks how they got that name exactly, to which Galanis says that it's from Paradise Lost by John Milton, quoting, "What if the breath that kindled those grim fires, awaked, should blow them into sevenfold rage, and plunge us into flames, or from above, should intermitted vengeance arm again, his red right hand to plague us." Galanis says that they can't blame them for being suspicious, as even though they told the council that they've moved past what Nussbaum and Aram did, it's not an unreasonable suspicion. Galanis is okay with a little scrutiny on their work if it means they get to study the Davic Covenant. Hickman says that that mindset is respectable, and he doesn't intend to interfere either. If they have any problems, they can come to him and he'll sort them out. But beyond that, he technically answers to Galanis for the duration of the project. He does say, however, that this is a huge project, as it's an entire city to uncover, and Galanis agrees, saying that there's no time to lose. They'll start descending tomorrow. Before we get into that, though, we're given another set of verses from a Davic historical text. The verses read, "As witnessed by Sodhi-Birat, second Rajmata of the Scarlet Maharaja. The covenant was struck, and the king of the Scarlet House of the Deva took his wife and his throne and slept."
Well, I had a thought. I guess I should just let this go before I get into it, but let me rewind it so I can start over.
The covenant was struck, and the king of the Scarlet House of the Deva took his wife and his throne, and slept, and dreamt a dream of a grand, great city of stone and spire, spanning vast farmlands and jungles, the seat of an empire that would truly please the Scarlet. At their emperor's behest, and now able to take form on the material plane, the Deva of the Scarlet rode down from the trees on their six-winged, thousand-legged beasts of burden, and joined in celebrations with the tribe of their new suzerain, in hymnal and orgiastic worship to the great Red Power. Then the Deva, with their many arms, grasped the stones and built a fortress to protect themselves, for now the Deva and the men were one in the eyes of the trees. They worked tirelessly and without cease for 3 nights and 3 days, while Mamjul, city for men, rose from the earth around the great tree of life. Then they climbed the trunk and branches of the tree, scaling it up to the heavens and back into the astral plane, whereupon they again began to work, constructing another city of star stuff and soul spirits given up to the cosmos after death. The leaves and fruits and flowers of the great tree formed the canopy for this Korar, city for Deva, great beacon through the empty wandering wastes of the heavens, a perfect mirror of its sister below, with the Scarlet Maharaja resting in his dream, sustaining the empire in the grand temple of the tree. The magic of the Deva was now man's to command, and the battle mages and sorcerer Nawabs marched out under their scarlet banner to conquer fertile lands and the godless cities in the name of their king, assisted by the spirits lengths tall and able to tear a man in two with only a strike. The red wave swept across Asia from the south, demolishing all in its path, consuming the spirit of the enemy, taking prisoner, slave, and loot back to Mamjul on the back of the great beasts of the Covenant. Cities would lay down arms and accept the Scarlet Maharaja as their Chakravarti, as his beasts and creatures brought down their walls, and the magicians would lay waste to their palaces and temples. The Scarlet Maharaja's bride, the Rajmata, would sit and rule in his stead, matriarch of the Covenant, as he slept in the branches of the great tree. Long-lived and beautiful and awesome, the lineage of queens would defend the city against all threats, and the city swelled with treasures and fine linens and foodstuffs across the vast Davic Covenant, and the poets and artists and dancers and people of thought filled its buildings with the culture of the Covenant. And when they died, their spirits would dance the dance of the cosmos, rising up the tree into Korar to live the eternal song of the Deva. And the Deva would reside in their kingdom above, watching over the men they loved so. And it was in this way that Mamjul became known as Mamjul, Jewel of the South, and Korar became the great tree kingdom of the cosmos. The first...
So, pause right there real quick after that. So, what I was going to say, right, like, I don't know a lot about the religious and mythological history of the various Indian cultures. You know, I know, like, there's Hinduism, but there's other, you know, ancient religious, you know, beliefs that they have as well. But I wonder if how much of this story and the Davites are kind of based off that, because I don't know, again, if it's Hinduism or something else. But I know that there is some, like, ancient stories from that region of, like, the gods living in heaven and then, like, being able to descend down to earth and go back up into heaven, and how there was, like, this great war in the sky that could be seen, and, you know, yada yada. So I wonder, like, if the city that they're talking about in the astral up in the stars in the city down below is kind of like based off some of that and was influenced by, you know, some of the mythos of that region, as well as the initial idea of, like, you know, the gods fighting in heaven and then descending to earth kind of a thing.
First of several dives into the ruins of the city took place on September 6th, 2002. The submersible aboard the Lilyhammer was outfitted with grab arms, spotlights, and a holding bay before being deployed, and was capable of both manned piloting by...
But it, excuse me, it is also interesting, right? So, like, I wonder if, again, during that great ancient war where the Meccans were assaulting the city, right? Like, is it a situation where the Davites could have buried the physical city down in the sea, and then all of them went to the astral city? Like, could the Meccans have actually... Would they be able to go to the astral city, right? Is there any kind of way for them to actually get there? Is that giant tree they're talking about essentially just a gateway? Because in that story, they talk about, you know, once the physical city down here arose after 3 days and nights, they then climbed the tree and built the city in the stars. So is this giant tree some kind of gateway for them? And anyone could potentially, using this tree, get to this astral city. And so by burying the physical, you know, city below in this tree in the ocean, the Davites have used that as like an Alamo situation, I guess, you know, where like it's the last resort. We have to bury this city so that no one can come up and attack our city in the stars, kind of a situation. You know what I mean? I might say the Davi in general, based on Hindu Persian mythology and aesthetic, but it's created stuff from fantasy too. Pretty much like the Mechanites have gone, Gear Throne Emperor, blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
By 2 to 3 crew members, or partial unmanned piloting by a primitive AI. For the first dive, they opted for the AI, with Desai in command and Galanis and Greaves observing. After being dropped into the water, the submersible continues to descend for 22 minutes, to a depth of 3.6 kilometers. Eventually, the stump comes into view, and thanks to the additional light from the submersible, it becomes apparent that the section that the divers explored was only a small part of the megastructure. The whole structure is nearly 400 meters in height, with a top circumference of 70 meters. From a distance, it's clear that the structure is reminiscent of a stump, although the base is too far to be seen. The submersible approaches closer to the exterior of the structure, showing the entire surface covered in extensive carvings and reliefs depicting a variety of scenes and figures, including a depiction of the tree itself, which also recursively contains reliefs of the tree and scenes. The submersible continues to revolve around the stump, taking pictures, and it's noted that the carvings of the figures and animals are remarkably realistic for being carved from wood. Many figures are clearly human, but many also display distinctly non-human qualities, ranging from horns to animal snouts and limbs. 2 figures recur frequently, and are depicted as nearly 3 or 4 times the height of the rest. One is a long-bearded man with an elaborate headdress, shown carrying long spears across his back and typically with eyes closed. The other is a gigantic androgynous entity with an
I think that's Sarkic, right? But I forget the creature's name. Wasn't there a tale about some kind of great Sarkic warrior that was filled with like spears or something like that? You know what I'm saying? We did a video on it. I'm trying to remember what video it was. But I swear that I don't know, that's just where my mind's going. But it's interesting that they're talking about it here with the Davites.
Obscured face, inset with gleaming red gemstones. They are almost always depicted together. At Galanis' command, the submersible uses a laser torch to cut off a small cube of the tree material and store it. It then travels to the top of the stump, finding the entrance hole revealed by the divers. It's spacious enough to fit through, so it descends inside, revealing the interior to be intricately constructed, featuring landings, corridors, and doorways, presumably leading off to smaller rooms. The interior walls also contain carvings, but a smaller amount, and the rubble of a spiral staircase can be seen far below through holes in various floors. Shortly after, Desai complains of someone whispering in the command room, and Greaves says that he hears it as well, but no
Yikes.
other members in the command room are speaking or report hearing any speaking.
The Davites.
Galanis notes the anomaly, as Greaves orders a routine cognitohazard evaluation for himself and Desai, but the mission proceeds. The submersible arrives at the base of the stump, which is too small for it to safely maneuver through. The high ceilings are inlaid with a winding root and vine pattern, and the far end of the room contains some kind of pedestal with a long object on it, but the visibility is poor. Beside it appears to be some kind of wooden throne. The submersible turns in the opposite direction and finds an exit to the structure, exiting out into the center of a large, wide avenue, lined on all sides by large stone-cut buildings and fortifications. The architecture of the buildings is heavily reminiscent of ancient South Asian architecture, with stacked terraced roofs and battlements of heavy stone. The street forks ahead, spreading out, and from where it's located, the submersible can see an entire section of Mamjul collapsed under the weight of the ocean. It begins to drift through the streets of the city, slowly mapping the area. The avenues are wide and broad, and the doorways and buildings throughout the city are strangely disproportionate to the average human body. The architecture remains similar, with towering shrines of stone and buildings with terraced temple roofs, but the farther away from the tree stump, the less intact the buildings are. Many show signs of extreme disrepair and stress, particularly around the outer edges of the city's walls, where they are practically piles of rubble. The submersible eventually ascends and deploys a sonar mapper to formulate a 3D map of the city. From this height, it's clear that the city is contained within 3 triangular walls, forming high ramparts, similar to Ammani Ram's circular Great Wall, although Mamjul is significantly larger in area. The submersible then returns to the base of the city, with operators pointing out sites of stress and battle. While a large amount of buildings appear crushed by the intense pressure, there are scorch marks, explosion craters, and bleached skeletons littering the streets of large portions of the city.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously this is the aftermath from the battle.
The amount of skeletons is particularly notable, with certain sections of the city literally layered in dead bodies, many of which suggest a non-human skeleton structure. Samples of some of the bones are taken. The submersible then passes a large building that appears relatively intact, with an entrance large enough to maneuver through. Desai assumes manual control and pilots it through, finding the interior to be filled with toppled shelves and scattered skeletal remains. One corner of the building, however, contains a cache of ceramic chests and jars that appear to be water-sealed. A number of these smaller jars are recovered, but Galanis orders the larger ones to be left behind until divers can grab them. The submersible leaves the structure and continues to explore the outer edges of the city, confirming its triangular shape, until it runs low on power and returns to the surface. Following its return and the analysis of onboard data, anomalies were detected in the audio recorded by the submersible's microphone. The audio tracks were isolated and amplified, revealing a low-frequency buzzing of unknown origin from when the submersible departed the stump to when it left the city entirely. Greaves and Desai both submitted to evaluations afterwards and passed with adequate scores. The samples recovered from the dive were analyzed on site in the clean labs aboard the Phantom before being transported off-site for long-term study and, if necessary, containment.
You know, and honestly, like, it makes me kind of wonder if there's any kind of connection between pattern screamers and like Davites in the story, because I don't know of anything else that is kind of like non-physical entities in the SCP universe other than pattern screamers. And a lot of the stuff they're talking about is kind of similar to how pattern screamers act, with the whispering and influencing kind of people's minds subtly until they can invade their bodies. So is that like what this is? Is the Scarlet just some kind of pattern screamer god, or pattern screamer in general, that like when it was wounded and came down to earth, like its essence, it put its like essence in this jewel, and then this person found this jewel, and that like pattern screamer essence and like went into its body and stuff like that. Like, you know, I don't know. But it's like, this sounds very like pattern screamer stuff going on here.
The piece of the stump recovered confirmed that the substance comprising the structure is organic, similar in appearance to teak wood,
Right.
but heavily hardened and mineralized through a process.
Because I mean, right, like, yeah, like if you're getting into like cosmic war stuff, pattern screamers that were left over from previous high toths, you would think could be at least, you know, something involved in something like that, you know? And maybe not necessarily, but there could be a probability of that, you know? So is that what the Scarlet is in this sense? Is like, it's just a pattern screamer, and that's, you know, like, I don't know.
Process resembling fossilization. The final product is a dark, knotted wood that is incredibly dense and hard, comparable to stone, while being entirely organically grown. The jars recovered were sealed and made watertight through application of a thick gum-like substance. Upon removal and opening the jars, stone and clay tablets were discovered inside, although they were all completely featureless, lacking any kind of writing or marking.
Hidden ink.
Their significance is
Invisible ink
as
trick.
of yet unknown. The digital images recorded of the various
I would assume that there probably is inscriptions on it, but you need to have some kind of like thaumaturgical knowledge to unlock them.
carvings on the Citadel and throughout the city were disseminated for analysis among the research team. On September 12th, the various research sectors comprising the team had the first of several leadership meetings. Galanis begins the meeting by welcoming everyone, saying that about a third of them are from Galanis' research team, while the rest have been flown out for this project. Galanis also introduces the second in command, Desai, and has everyone introduce themselves as they speak. Sheridan, head of archaeology, and Yijun, head
John
of the
Sheridan,
linguistic
Babylon
analysis
5.
team, introduce themselves, with Yijun asking if they're in danger, pointing out Greaves and the MTF in the corner of the room. Galanis explains that they are here just as observers, and Greaves says that they should pretend he's not even here. Galanis continues after a pause, saying that since the submersible dive, they've confirmed that they're not getting any expressly anomalous readings from the city itself or any of the recovered material. The samples recovered are definitely odd and of significant interest to the project, but Hume levels are normal, evaluations after the dive were normal, and pretty much all readings are normal. Aberer, head of anthropology, interjects to say that they've barely explored the city so far, and Galanis agrees, saying that the submersible wasn't able to get into any of the nooks and crannies, but the O5 Council and Greaves have authorized human exploration of the city.
Yikes.
A small cheer rings out, but Ramaswamy of the Parahistory team says that while that's amazing, how are they sure it's safe?
Yeah, I mean, like they literally just said seconds ago, they've barely scratched the surface of this city and they're ready to send in people, right? Like, you don't know what's down there, and you already know from Ammani Ram and the stuff that happened with the Meccans and the history that you were told there, what the Davites could be about and the stuff you could potentially see here. I would send down a fleet of submersibles to really search through everything first before I started sending in people. I feel like that's a little premature, but you know, it's the Foundation.
Galanis says that there's no reason to think that there's anything spooky down there, but
You're
they'd
retarded.
like everyone to be cautious regardless. Even without anything anomalous, exploring those old degraded ruins can be dangerous at the best of times.
I'm sorry, that's just dumb.
As Galanis is about to mention what happened to Dr. Nussbaum, Greaves cuts in, saying that there's nothing expressly anomalous here, but it would do everyone well to be cautious. Galanis
I feel like the lack of anomalous stuff in a city like this that you know is a part of that history would be suspicious.
continues, wanting to go over their current pool of knowledge on the Davic Covenant to get everyone on the same page. Prior to discovering Mamjul, all of their knowledge on the Davic Covenant came from either the Aegean tablets or records recovered from the Ammani Ram initiative. The image they give is of some kind of caste-based Proto-Tamil Indian civilization, one that made exceptionally heavy use of life magic. The ancient Mechanites wrote far less about the Davic Covenant than they did about the Nalka, or the Sarkites, but the Foundation has determined that they were hostile to one another. Mechanite dogma was transhumanist, and the way they spoke of and referenced the Covenant suggests their religion and magic, which seemed to be more concerned with the spirit and soul, conflicted easily. Ramaswamy says that while this is certainly true, he'd like to remind everyone that they are unfortunately limited in scope by the nature and context of their sources. As mentioned, the Davic Covenant, the Mechanite Empire, and the Nalka peoples were at war with one another almost as soon as they became aware of one another when colonizing Central Asia.
It is also interesting that they call it the Davite Covenant, right? Like, and that, again, it was formed initially by an agreement between the Scarlet and a human, right? Like, there was essentially, it's a, in D&D terms, right? Like, they're essentially like a warlock civilization, right? They have like a pact with an elder being that is giving them these powers. So again, I don't know, it feels very kind of pattern screamer-ish, where like they're agreeing to allow these pattern screamers access to the physical realm and their bodies, and in return the pattern screamers are giving them access to magic and abilities that normally through physical means wouldn't be accessible or normal, or just be more difficult to do, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know, but it to me it's interesting in particular that they're calling it a covenant, you know, that like that is like the very kind of specific wording.
It's possible, and even likely, that much of the writings from this period were more intended as religious propaganda than historical record. Galanis agrees, which brings up the Aegean tablets, and takes it over to Sheridan from archaeology. Sheridan says that the section of the tablets they've translated so far, the one describing the Covenant, shares some broad strokes with the Mechanite portrayal. A precursor to Tamil Indian empires in the same way the Mechanites would later influence pre-Islamic Arabian empires. They go into detail about the magic of life referenced in the first tablet, and right now they're inclined to think it's some kind of thaumaturgy focusing on living tissue, particularly plant matter. To sum their origin up, the first human tribes in India apparently were farther south during a recession of the Indian Ocean. The leader of one of those tribes made some kind of deal with a spirit, a deva, to ally their societies into one, making the Davic Covenant. This is quite similar to the Mechanite myth of their origin, with a god offering boons to a human society in exchange for service and worship. And both civilizations seem to agree that these gods were somehow related. From there, it's a bit murkier, with it describing the construction of Mamjul, but no idea what Korar even is, if anything. It breaks from the Mechanite dogma, referencing 4 gods at the start instead of 3, including something called the Wretch.
The Wretch, which I would assume is the
Sheridan
Abominant.
says that he doesn't even know.
Which would be interesting if, like, I'm trying to think of, for, like, the Meccans, right? Like, what would be something that would be, like, so foul, so evil, so opposite of them, right? That they would kind of want to, like, stricken it from knowledge, from history. Almost kind of like their version of Satan or the devil. Like, if Yaldabaoth and the Davites kind of, like, were, I guess, not, I don't know how I want to word this, you know? Like, in most of the tales that that I've heard in the SCP stories, it's basically like the Meccans and the Sarkics are basically kind of like opposites of each other. And like one is, you know, the Sarkics are about instinct, brutality of nature, you know, nature kind of in its like basis form, survival of the fittest kind of a situation, where the Meccans obviously are about technology and enlightenment through technology and science and stuff like that. They're kind of opposites of each other. And then, you know, the Davites kind of fit in between there, as a precursor to the Sarkics before the Sarkics had overthrown them. So I'm trying to think of, like, from everything else that I know about the SCP stuff in the past, right? Like, what could this 4th entity be? Could it be the Fae? Could they, you know, could it be something of the Fae and they call it an abominant because it's not actually human, and so they consider it an abomination, and maybe like their technology just has like no effect on them because of how powerful with like manifestation and stuff or whatever the Fae may be. Maybe it's the Children of the Night. They consider them an abomination because they weren't created naturally, you know? Those are the only 2 that really kind of come to mind. I can't really think of any other kind of major faction thing or whatever that would be a part of this, other than I maybe some kind of pattern screamer situation. But from what we've heard of the Davites so far, that kind of feels more like that. But we haven't gotten into what the abominant could be necessarily yet, so I don't know. So I'm just trying to think of like what would be something that is so terrible that the Meccans would basically kind of stricken it from history, whereas the Davites here at least acknowledge its existence as like a 4th god and or entity being, whatever.
Know what the Deva exactly are, how they managed to bring down Ammani Ram, or how they relate to the Abominant. Glennis says that there's a lot more questions than answers, and was hoping that the city would clarify some of them, but so far all they've found are blank tablets and bones.
Of course.
Something
typical SCP story where, you know, we only get more questions than answers here.
bad happened here, but they don't know what. Desai then cuts in, saying that he's no scientist, but it seems like they are kind of missing the forest for the trees. After hesitating for a moment, he asks, what kind of power does it take to sink an entire continent.
Right.
A silence washes over the room until Galanis says that it's their job to find out and dismisses the group. You know as well as I know that the sunken city is not free of anomalies, so only time will tell what mysteries lurk in those ancient buildings. The research team is largely optimistic, excited at all of the potential that a lost city might hold, but the whispers that some of them are hearing are certainly ominous enough. The O5 Council wants to desperately avoid a repeat of what happened in Ammani Ram, but while they may be able to avoid making the same mistakes as before, they might just go ahead and make some new ones. We'll find out more about Mamjul and Korar in the second part.
Next time on Dragon Ball Z. No quote, I bet. We haven't been getting a whole lot of quotes yet. Okay. We're beyond the quotes. We're beyond the quotes. So, I mean, yeah, I've pretty much given a lot of my thoughts as we were going on about this stuff, you know. What really are the Davites? Are they pattern screamers potentially? You know, is the Scarlet a pattern screamer? Is that how, you know, have they made some kind of pact? Are they like pattern screamers with a different approach where they're like have made a pact with humanity in order to get access to the physical realm instead of just trying to force themselves on people, you know what I'm saying, as like typical pattern screamers are? Or is it something completely different? And then obviously this city seems to be, you know, the aftermath, it being underneath the ocean, as they said at the end here. What is the kind of power would it take to sink a continent in a city with it, you know? So it seems to be potentially the aftermath of this great battle that was taking place at the end of the Ammani Ram tale. And I guess again the question is, for me, did the Davites purposely sink it to block off access to their astral city potentially, or was this the actions of the Meccans just to sink this city so that they could no longer have, you know, a foothold in the physical realm, to block them off, you know what I'm saying? And then of course, as I was talking about at the end there, what could the abominant really be, you know? If it's something that the Davites recognize and acknowledge, and in their creation mythos there's 4 gods to begin with in this great cosmic war that took place, but in the Meccan history it was only 3, and they struck the abominant from record, right? Like it's very kind of, again, 40k reference, it's very kind of similar to the Emperor's, you know, thought process with chaos. Like, don't give chaos any kind of thought, any kind of power, stricken it from existence. Don't let anyone know about it, because the more people know about it, the more belief could be given to it, which could then give it more power, you know, kind of a situation. So is that like where they were going with that? But what would be something that would be so terrible that they would want to like stricken it from history if, you know, they didn't do that with the Sarkics and the Davites? And it could very well be, I mean, because like in the Ammani Ram tale, it very much seemed like the Meccans actually had the upper hand against both the Sarkics and the Davites. Their technology and military power seemed great enough to where they were winning the war against both of them on 2 separate fronts. And the only thing that pushed them back was an alliance between the Sarkics and the Davites. And then the Abominate happened to step in as a 4th faction and, you know, was the deciding factor in the siege of Ammani Ram that actually caused them to have to use their ace in the hole and teleport away before the city was completely overrun and destroyed. So I mean, yeah, it seems like it's just, the fact that the Sarkics and the Davites were even mentioned as a part of history was just because they were the great foes that needed to be purged from the land, and the Meccans' power was great enough to do that. But it seems like, for whatever reason, the Abominates, maybe not. The abominant could be something that is completely opposite of the Meccans, to the point where they feared it enough maybe to not want to even talk about it. So that to me right now is kind of the biggest question, is moving forward, really, what is the abominant, and are we going to really learn what it is, kind of situation, you know? So but yeah, that's gonna do it for this episode, guys. This was part 1 of Mamjul and Korar, SCP-001 by the Exploring series. I'm going to release these videos individually as, you know, I do them, but once I get all the videos done, I'm also going to put them together into one long video. So I don't know, it's going to be a pretty long one, because I mean, this video in and of itself is, you know, a lot of these videos in the series are an hour or an hour and a half plus long. So this could be like, you know, a 6-hour long video if you wanted to watch them all together. But so I'll have it broken up into parts and uploaded individually, so you can follow along that way. Or if you want to watch it all in one long thing, I will upload that as well once we get through all of them. But links will be down below in the description to the playlist here for this Red Tape series from the Exploring series. So yeah, links down below. Check all that stuff out. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it. Be sure to go over there and give the Exploring series a sub if you haven't already. You know, give the man some love, show him some support. If you're around the channel for a while and want to take your support here for the next level, you know, there's a join button underneath the video. You can check out the YouTube membership benefits and tiers that I have to offer. If you enjoyed my commentary and reaction here, be sure to consider giving a like. It helps me and the channel grow. It lets me and the YouTube algorithm know that you guys enjoy kind of videos and this content and you want to see some more. So thanks for watching. Appreciate you taking the time. If you're still watching here to the end, we'll see you guys next time.